Hi, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm Dana Claiborne, language arts tutor, and just wanted to say welcome. Today, I'm doing a lesson on narration, particularly my fifth rule of narrative writing. I have been, my students and I have been on this writing track in which we have been practicing narratives, which means a formal essay that involves storytelling, something that you've done in the past or a particular experience that you've had. So I want to get straight into this particular guide. I'm using a guide that I use in session here today on PowerPoint. Once again, as is my custom. So I want to say a special hello and thank you to any students who might be tuning in, any parents as well. And so I'm going to get straight to things. I'm going to switch over to camera number 2. And here is the PowerPoint guide that I'm using. I'm going to kind of get myself on DVE, and there I am. And I'm with you officially. All right. So we've been talking about narratives, which is the story style essay. And these kinds of essays are good for, obviously something you do in school assignments, but also good for applications. If you're applying to something, sometimes the admissions personnel will ask you to write a writing assignment or to narrate something that you've been doing. So that's what this is, personal narrative. And we have been going through different principles of things that students should do in narration. So before I get to the fifth one, before I really focus in on number 5, I want to take a moment to just let everybody know that number 5 includes the other 4. So what I want to do is take a moment to go through those briefly, the first few, so that it'll make more sense when when I mention and discuss their inclusion inside of rule number or principle number 5. Okay, so I call these the 5 rules of narrative writing. What they are is my 5 principles, content that I look for inside students' narratives when they write personal narratives or stories. And it actually applies to impersonal narratives too, but that's the kind that we're studying right now, is personal narratives. So the first 4 principles are these here, and I call these 5 rules of narrative writing. The reason I share these with students is for the sake of the ideas or the quality of ideas to be included in their narrative essays. And so I share it with you also for you to consider these components of narration, of storytelling, to aid you to become a better storyteller. And so I say this, it's, the process of storytelling is about recognizing what the reader is trying to do when they read the story. And I say to students, the main thing that every reader is probably trying to do when they read a good story is imagine. They're trying to imagine. And so if you as a storyteller can aid them in imagination, then you instantly become a better storyteller than someone who doesn't. Okay, and so put it that way. Some people, just by virtue of their personalities, are great storytellers. And then some, it's a learned craft. And so what I try to do is give or provide some principles to think about that help with the process of telling a good story. And so that's what these principles are. And the first 4 are included inside number 5. So let's get to it and take a look at it. The first one, use details. All right. This means the small things that happen within a story that cause the reader to be able to imagine it better. And the reason why details help the reader imagine it better is because the details are the small things that only the person who was there would actually know. You see what I mean? The small stuff is only usually known by people who were there. So the details are central to helping the reader feel like they are there. If you include it, then it becomes easier to imagine being there in the scene. And so I tell students, before you actually start writing the actual narrative out. Take a moment to gather some of those small things. Who did what this person said, person's name, these people's names. Learn each setting. Okay, consider each setting. Learn all the different things that happen in the backstory, maybe things that happen before the main action of the story takes place. All of these things are key details that can help the reader feel like they're there if you include them. And so sometimes I think students tend to try to skip over the trivial things because they're trivial things. But some of them you need some of those small things, because those details help the reader imagine and feel like they're there in the story, because they know that the small things are only known by people who are there, and that's just the way it is. Okay, so the 5 W's and the H are kind of the method I show for gathering details. These are categorical questions that students can ask themselves: who, what, when, where, why, and how. I say who did what. That's kind of a great start off to think of when you're gathering details. All the individual little things that happen and who is responsible. Those things are great to start with when gathering details. And I have a detailed writing chart that I let students fill out if they want to, or sometimes even require to gather details before you start writing. It does make a difference. Okay, so that's first. In your pre-writing process, try gathering some details, some key details that you can include in the narrative to help the reader feel like they were there. Okay. Secondly, use descriptive language, specifically to describe settings. So I tell student writers, you want to think of yourself as a tour guide when you're writing your narrative. When we compose a personal narrative, everything that we do, we want to take the reader with us. We are mobile creatures. Whenever something's happening, we go from place to place to place. Even if it means from one room to another room, you're still changing settings. And so you want to aid the reader in imagination by helping them experience each setting every time you switch settings. And so a good storyteller, they want the reader to be included in every single scene, and every single scene happens somewhere. And so it's you could almost say polite to let the reader experience your setting at the same time that you as the narrator are, especially if it's a personal narrative. So I say take a sentence or two, maybe even more if you have, just depending on what's around. Take a sentence or two and describe what it is that's around you whenever you go from one setting to the next. And that helps the reader imagine, and it guides them through the story alongside you as the narrator. Okay? So principle number 2, describe your settings. Okay? Take a sentence or two every time the setting changes. And so for pre-writing, what you can do is you can write out and consider ahead of time what the settings are, write those down, and write some key adjectives or prepositional phrases just to be able to include when describing what's around. Okay? All right, enough of that. Number 3, be specific. Being specific means using exact references. And what this does is it aids in credibility. The more specific you are, the easier it is to believe you, and the easier it is to imagine. I give the example. I tell students, if I said, this past weekend, I went to the store and I purchased the shirt. And that's all I said. Well, could they believe that? Yeah, they could believe that. But if I said I went to, this past Saturday around 4:30 p.m., I went to Target and I purchased a black and gold Mosimo shirt with a picture of a gold butterfly on it. Well, which is easier to believe? I went to the store and purchased a shirt, or I went to Target and purchased the gold and black Mosimo shirt? Well, I think it's a no-brainer. The second one, the one in which I was more specific, is going to be easier to believe and easier to imagine. Why? Could you imagine going to the store? If I said store, could somebody imagine a store? Yeah, they could. But it's a lot easier to imagine a specific store that you're familiar with already. If I mention Target, people's minds automatically go towards the image that they have of Target if they've been to Target, and many folks have. You walk in there, everything's red, all the employees have on red shirts with khaki pants. You might see a Starbucks off to the left or a Pizza Hut or something, and the cash registers at the front, or the checkout centers at the front. Yeah. People know what Target looks like. So just by using the name of a specific place, of a specific area, it aids in imagination. So being specific, using real names of people, places, dates, times, titles, along with the descriptive language, helps the reader imagine and aids in your credibility as a writer. Okay, makes it easier to believe you. So principle number 3, be specific. And then lastly, before rule number 4, principle number 4, use interior monologue. And so a lot of times students haven't always known what this is, and so I have the pleasure of introducing it to them. Interior means inside, and the monologue is the narration of the narrator, the inside thoughts or the thoughts of the narrator about what's happening. So interior monologue, okay, is the inside thoughts that you as the narrator are thinking in your mind as things are happening, okay? And so interior means inside, monologue means the narrative events of what's happening in the story. So interior monologue means the inside thoughts of the narrator as things are happening in the story. And the reason why this is, I call this kind of a secret weapon that many great authors use when telling their stories, because they know it's not just interesting. It's not just interesting to find out what happens to a character. It's also interesting to find out how that character feels about what's happening to them. We as the readers, we want to know what happens to a character in the story. That's interesting. But it compounds the interest to know how that character feels and thinks about what's happening to them. And so we want to include inner imaginations, the things that maybe as something's happening in your story, you want to talk about what you're imagining. Maybe you're feeling some internal conflict. Maybe something's bothering you. Maybe you're nervous or scared, or maybe you're imagining this. All of those things add tension to the story, and it helps the reader connect with a character emotionally. And so all of those things are very enthralling and cause the story to be that much more interesting. And so I tell students to consider some interior monologue ahead of time within the events of your story as you're telling the story, okay? And to purposefully include it. All 4 of these principles are something you have to do on purpose. Some students might do them, accidentally, but for the most part, that's not what happens. For the most part, a lot of times when this is done, it's done on purpose. And so students look at this list and say, okay, I got some detail, but I really don't have any description of setting, so I'm going to take a moment and describe setting. Or I got setting, but I don't have any interior monologue, so I'm going to look for a place in the story where I can include my thoughts and my inner imaginations and add some interior monologue. These 4 elements are key in revision, okay? Now, I say all that to say, I say all that to bring me to rule number 5, which is tell the story as it happens. And I say that all of the first 4 are included in this last one, telling the story as it happens. Because this is about the style by which we tell the story. We want to tell the story in what I call real time. Okay? And that means telling it in such a way that the reader experiences it at the same time and in the same way that we do. Okay? And so I go to the title page. The nickname I have for this principle is dramatizing. And what it means, and it's exactly what I just previously stated in telling the story in such a way that we take the reader with us through everything that happens so that they can experience it in real time as we do. So why do I call it dramatizing? Well, it tends to make the story more dramatic naturally when you tell it like this, because you're not giving everything away all at once. And so dramatizing is the process of explaining parts of the story in a way that builds suspense and anticipation. And I say to dramatize the story, you don't reveal everything. Only what's experienced with your senses, what you see, what you hear around you, only what the narrator or protagonist is experiencing with, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and what they're feeling. So it does include interior monologue as well. Okay? So we're going to look at an example of a non-dramatized statement right here. Okay? It started to rain. Notice how that's just flatly announced. Okay? And sometimes it's okay to announce things announce ideas in the narrative. But sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you want to dramatize it, which means to draw out the scene and only reveal what's experienced with your senses and what you see, namely what you see and hear. And so it started to rain. Nothing dramatic about that at all. So instead of that, what we're going to do is we're going to just let you know only what we experience. You're going to say, well, Mr. Claiborne, how can you make something like that, something that plain, dramatic? Well, let's read it, because you can. It says, I stood and then felt something hit my head. Then I felt it again. I put my hand to my head and noticed it was wet. As I looked up, I realized it had started to rain. Notice how we don't tell you everything all at once. We don't tell you flatly that it started to rain. Instead, we just tell you how we realized that it started to rain. We tell you what we saw and heard and felt and what that ultimately amounted to as to how we realized that it has started to rain. Okay? And so when you look at this right here, telling it this way, I stood and then felt something hit my head. Well, what does that do? That causes the reader to wonder. Felt something hit his head or hit her head. What could that be? Maybe it's a meteorite. Maybe there's about to be a big meteor shower. Maybe everything's about to come to an end. Maybe it's a big apocalypse and everything's about to be destroyed. Well, maybe not that dramatic, but you get the idea, right? Then I felt it again. What is it? Another meteorite. I put my hand to my head and noticed it was wet. Maybe it's not a meteorite. Maybe it's acid. Maybe there's about to be a big acid storm. All right, cloudy with the chance of acid, right? I'm just playing. As I looked up, I realized that it had started to rain. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Everything's okay. You see? And, I'm being overly pessimistic, but you get the idea. When you don't reveal everything at once, it allows the reader the chance to wonder, okay? And that draws them in emotionally and makes your story more interesting, all right? So telling the story, even something as simple as this, drawing out the tension by only revealing what you're experiencing with your senses in real time. That's what we mean when we say dramatizing or telling the story as it happens, okay? So let me switch over. Let's look at another example. Let's look at one more. It says, and here it is, it's announced again. When I received my test back, I got a bad grade. Okay. Well, notice how we just flatly, you know, flatly announce it. All right, we don't take you through anything. We just say it plainly, even though it's a two part idea. Well, I had said that dramatizing includes the other four. It includes detail. It includes descriptive language. It includes specific references. It includes interior monologue. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take you through the scene. We're not just gonna say, when I received my test back, I got a bad grade. No, we're gonna take you through the experience of what it was actually like. That's what good narrators do. Okay? So I'm gonna read it, and we're just gonna look at the example. Okay? It says, as I sat at my desk, Mrs. Finkbeiner announced that she would be handing back our test. My heart began to pound because I remember how I didn't know anything on the final page. Mrs. Finkbeiner starts at the front like she always does, in alphabetical order. She hands Corey back his test first. I see a star sticker in the left corner, so I know he got a good grade. Yes, says Corey. Next, Mrs. Finkbeiner hands Brittany back her paper. She doesn't have a star sticker, but she must not have received too bad of a grade, because she just laughs and asks Channing what he thinks he got. Mrs. Finkbeiner finally turns to me. She hands me my paper folded down without making any eye contact with me. I hold up the left corner. No star sticker. I almost decided to put it in my folder without looking, but I know I'll be curious all recess long if I don't. I uncover the top edge slightly. I gradually uncover it until I see in red circled ink the number 71 at the top right side. Notice what we did. Okay? We didn't just tell you plainly when we got it back, it was bad grade. No. We recognize the intensity of a scene like this. And good narrators, they recognize when a scene is intense enough to take the reader through. Okay? This is, we've all experienced this before. We know what it's like to, more than likely, you know what it's like, unless you're homeschooled. You know what it's like for your teacher to stand up with a stack of tests or quizzes or something that he or she graded and announce that they're about to hand them back, or he or she's about to hand them back. And everybody's intense, wondering wonder what I got. And what you think you got? And it's like, I don't think I did so good. Well, yeah, that's an intense moment. Don't rob the reader of that experience by just flatly announcing it. No, take the reader with you. All right, let them experience it at the same time that you experience it. Okay, it'll cause your story to be more gripping and interesting. All right, so I want to bring to attention that even in a scene like this, there are references, right, to these principles. All right. If you look, as I sat at my desk, Mrs. Finkbeiner announced she'll be handing back our test, starting in alphabetical order. Okay. Details. You see? Specific references. Notice how we give you names. Mrs. Finkbeiner. We tell you the teacher's name. We don't just say my teacher. You see? Mrs. Finkbeiner. Corey. All right. Channing. Brittany. All right. Notice the exact names. The star sticker. Details. You see what I mean? Okay. Notice right here what we say. Mrs. Finkbeiner announced that she would be handing back our test. My heart began to pound because I remember how I didn't know anything on the final page. What's that? That's interior monologue. The narrator's telling you what they're thinking and how they're feeling. You see? How they're feeling on the inside. Even down here, I almost decided to put it in my folder without looking, but I know I'll be curious all recess long if I don't. They're telling you what they're thinking. What's going on in their mind. You see? That is interior monologue done on purpose, and that's how you have to do it, on purpose, and it's included in the process of dramatizing. Okay, in the process of telling the story in real time, so the reader can experience it at the same time you do. Okay, so what I want to do is give you a chance to practice. What I do is we look at this principle. And we practice using your own imagination and your own application of these four principles. So I want you to get a piece of paper. I'm going to give you give you one idea that you can practice dramatizing. And so take a moment. I'm just going to kind of pause, or I'll just have you pause the video, take a moment, and get you some writing materials. Or if you want to type it on Google Docs or something, you can do that. Okay, so take just a moment. Be right back. All right, we're we're back. Hopefully, you were able to get some writing materials. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna take a look at one idea in which you can practice this principle on your own. So I'm gonna switch back to camera 2. Okay, and I'm gonna put myself here. And here it is right here. This is the one that we'll practice on. It says, when I went home, there was a surprise party. Okay? And so notice how we just tell you plainly, just flatly announce the two parts to the idea, the part of going home and how we recognize there was a surprise party. Okay? So what you want to do is consider how we can narrate this scene in real time. Say to yourself, okay, let's explain the process of actually going home. What we see, what we hear, what's happening around us in that moment, and explain step by step exactly what's happening. All right? Only what we reveal with our senses and only what we're thinking. Okay? And not only that process of going home, how we realize there was a surprise party. So take a moment and dramatize this sentence right here. Okay? You can write it down for just a minute, and then I'll put this one back as an example so you can look at it to see what it does again if you'd like. But take a moment and write that sentence, write that down. Okay. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to switch this over, and I'm gonna write a scene, and we can write it together. So I'm gonna kind of switch cameras here and put myself on. Let's get rid of that. Switch over, and switch file source to camera 2, and we're just going to put that on. There we go. And I'm putting it here, and hopefully you can still read that. It says, when I went home, there was a surprise party. And so I'm going to write it, and you can write at the same time I write. I got mine. I guess I'll go ahead and read it and share it with you. If you don't have yours, that's okay. If you maybe you finished before I did, and that might even be even better if you did a good job. Okay, and so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna blow this up a little bit just to make it a little easier to read, and I'm gonna take away the italics because I don't like those. All right, and I think what I'll do is give it a different color and open up another Word document or Google document so it's easy to look at on actual paper. So I'll just open Microsoft Word, and here it is. And let me kind of switch back to camera 2. There we go. And use fill source camera 1. And there we go. All right, so this is mine, and I am just gonna give it a different font because I don't like this font, and you know, and mine is more 2 paragraphs, you know, and so just sometimes I tend to write a lot because I'm trying to follow the rules and tell it in such a way that causes it to be in real time. And so I'm gonna read mine once again instead of this the sentence that says, when I went home there was a surprise party. Instead, we're gonna take you through the actual scene, and I'll just kind of share mine, what I wrote with you all. And if you want to share yours, feel free. If you want to send it to me or send it to one of my aides, maybe if I can get them to read it, maybe I'll do that. But this is mine. It says, as I exited the bus, I feel even more. Let me kind of get rid of that, correcting myself in the middle of my own draft. As I exit the bus, I felt even more disillusioned. I head down the street, the burden of my book bag bearing down painfully on my shoulder. I walk slowly down the street and hit the sidewalk on the way to my cul-de-sac. No one had really said anything to me today. My teacher had acknowledged my birthday, and then I received a few well wishes from a couple students in my class at the same time when they discovered that today was my birthday, but nothing from anyone else. Even in the cafeteria, my friends talked about every kind of video game and water ride from Water Country, but no mention of my birthday, although I'm sure they had known before. I pick up my pace a bit as I feel the sweat trickle down my back from the sun bearing down on me also. 2 kids zoom past me on bicycles, but I cannot make out who they are since I could only see the orange and blue stripes and gray t-shirt flapping in the wind as they look smaller and smaller riding into the distance. I decide to cross the street to the side with my house. Still looking down, I almost walk into a red Honda Civic. There is actually a line of cars in front of it. However, I don't see anyone at all. Looking through the windows, I see that some have wrapping paper and gifts inside. I finally reach my mailbox. Let me put that. All right. I finally reach my mailbox with someone's random tricycle on the ground in front of it. I stride up the stairs to my door and place in my key. It's at this point that I'm almost certain I heard whispering, but the house is completely dark. Opening the door, I step inside and it smells of a lavender scent. I unload my book bag from my shoulder, resolving to take it to my resolving to take it and drag it. Resolving to take it to my bedroom is what that should say. And drag it up the stairs and make my way to my room. About to mount the steps, faces burst out of closets and emerge from everywhere to shout, "Surprise! Happy birthday!" So I had to make a few edits in mine. But just notice, we take you through the actual experience instead of just flatly announcing that when we went home, there was a surprise party. And that's what I mean. Letting the reader experience what you experience in that moment. Okay? And so if you want to share yours, feel free to do that. I think I'm gonna make one more change. Here, I'm just like that. I need to fix this because it's gonna bother me if I don't change it. I love my book bag, resolving to take it to my bedroom. Okay. Resolving to, I'm just gonna get rid of that. Resolving to drag it up the stairs and make my way to my room. Now I feel good. Okay. If you do want to share yours with me, I can try to look at it or have one of my aides look at it, but hopefully this is a pretty clean and easy strategy that you can use to consider when you're writing your own personal narratives. Okay, so I'm gonna switch back over to camera 1 and get rid of that. That should be about it. Okay, feel free to let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully that particular fifth rule or fifth principle was helpful. And once again, thank you again for tuning in. I'll see you next time. I don't like it. Why did I have to do that? Why?